All of what we did so far is preparation for teaching this practice that I call Angels of the Four Corners. And I want to tell you the story of how I learned this practice. So in the Theosophical Society in America, there is a spiritual community called Crotona, which is in Ojai, California, and goes back to the time of Krishnamurti in the 1920s. So I visited this Crotona course seminar about Annie Besant when, not long after I joined the Theosophical Society. So 10 years ago, 2009 was when I went. And every morning, the community comes together for a 15 or 20-minute long meditation to begin the day. And they do it in a very large hall, maybe as large as this or a little larger, that they call their meditation hall. So I would sometimes arrive early, and before anyone was in the room, I would just sit to notice the energies. And as I was doing that, I started to realize that each of the four corners of the room had a deva, or an angel, in it. And one of the angels was traumatized about something. And it looked like there was some kind of entanglement between a human and a deva. I didn't know anything about this. I'd never seen it before. And I learned about some troubles in the community that may have somehow been reflected in this. I learned from these devas why they are there, and I learned that they come into any sacred space, and that they always come in the same order and relationship, whether people know it or bring them in intentionally or not. And so when I go into a location like this that has been dedicated to spiritual work for a long time, I look for them because they may already be here. And in fact, in this hall, they were already here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to teach you what I call the grid, the angel grid, that sets up this as a sacred space. And it's something, as you'll see from the slides, that you can do on your own. You can do it for a room, your own room or a meditation room. You can do it for a house. You can do it for a place of business or a meeting room under certain circumstances, which I'll be clear about. These are experiments that I and my classes have made for 10 years. And what I offer you is a very refined version of this, very worked out version of this practice. I tried it for the first time in Germany last year with a non-theosophical group as an experiment to see how it worked with a large number of people. And it worked, so I offer it now to you. So, started. So there are four of these angels of the four corners, and they're not the angels of the four directions. You'll often find traditions that talk about the directions. So, as I understand it, east is this direction.
Yeah.
And everything in this grid is based off the east. And so the building is ideally situated for that. The east being the source of light. So the four angels are power, beauty, love, and truth. And I'll tell you about their locations as we progress here. And then there's a third one that or a fourth one, sorry, a fifth one that you probably haven't heard about before. I call it the subtle alignment deva. And I feel that the purpose of this deva is to help us become more aligned with the basic, the fundamental love and consciousness of the universe. And as you see, the three letters make the word sad. And sometimes we experience in my classes this deva as sad because we don't know of her existence or we don't ask for the experience of alignment. So,
only in English, huh?
yeah. Yes, of course. So perhaps the people in the Netherlands are happier people and they're happiest. We'll see. But the important thing is to recognize that there is a harmony in the universe, everywhere in the universe, and that all we need to do is a slight turn of our consciousness and work with it and align with it. And this Deva shows the way and helps us stay aligned. So that's why I call this Deva the subtle alignment Deva. And often this Deva appears as a she and could be called an expression of the Great Mother. So each of the Devas comes with a mantra. And I apologize in advance if this Dutch makes no sense. Because what I did was I took the mantra and put it into Google Translator. And if I then switched it from English to Dutch, and it came out exactly the same, I thought there was a chance that it was correct. So, but I wanted people to have the opportunity to use these mantras in your own language. I think it would be more effective to use it in English. So, power that does its duty without control is the mantra of the Power Deva. And if this is the east, that Deva is in this corner. I have a map that I'll show you in a moment. So, how did I Google Translate it? Pretty good? Okay. I noticed some people are writing. So, when we get to the meditation itself, I have a screen where all four are present, and that screen will be up for the whole duration of the meditation, and you can write it down or you can think about it later. But think about the nature of power as we usually experience it. It's all about control and maybe nothing about duty. Okay? Not doing what we need to do to support the evolution of others, but something that we do because we like the feel of control. And even in the case where we know what our duty is or what someone else's duty is, we might push them or force them to do it. So power, as far as the angels are concerned, is there is a duty, you do it, but there's no intention to control anyone. And in fact, the problem in the corner at Cortona was there was duty and there was control. So the second one, the beauty angel mantra, is beauty that is not afraid to show itself. Now, I consider beauty in this sense to be an expression of the source, which is my name for God consciousness or the divine, or the logos as it's called in some theosophical writings. If we're clear, the source shines through us. And that's the experience of beauty. And when we have a direct relationship with the source in something that we see outside of ourselves or a person, if it's true beauty, then it's our connection to the divine that we're seeing. So how did Google do with this one? Is it okay? Yeah? Good. Okay, so the third one is the love angel mantra. Love that stands firm and does not turn away. Okay, good. So what is meant by this is people don't realize when they think about falling in love, for example, and there's all this wonder and desire and often illusion, just how challenging love is to maintain long term in any relationship. And one of the things that we have to learn is it's not love when we just do everything someone else wants, especially if it's not good for us or for the other person. And there are many situations, for example with children, where what you have to do is be very clear and very firm that you love them and you're there for them, you're not turning away, and no. Yes. So I don't think of it, she said tough love, I don't think of it as being tough, but standing firm implies that. There doesn't need to be any scariness about it, for example, just clarity. And then the truth angel mantra is truth that guides without judgment. This one I had a little more trouble with because the idea of judgment in in English seemed to be a little bit different. It wanted to come out as criticism, which I think is not quite the same thing. What I meant was the thought that you are somehow superior, that you have the truth, and that because you have the truth, you are superior, and you're going to help all of the misguided individuals who do not have that truth. That's judgment. How did this one do? Not quite so good. I'll be happy to get suggestions, because then I can change the slides. Okay, so those are the mantras. The use of the mantras is to help us align ourselves with the devas, and to help the devas manifest themselves a little more clearly. The thing is, devas withdraw from us humans when we're misbehaving, which we don't even know we're doing. And these are the 4 areas that we especially need to learn how to behave in correctly, so that we can have a connection with them. Okay, so now I want to talk about this grid that is reflected in the 4 corners. The purpose is that it supports the idea of sacred space, and as I mentioned, I find it already there many times I go into a sacred space. In my classes, we build it up through guided imagery, and then what I mean by that is we imagine the room internally, and what happens is that you can then project the internal room onto an external space by just making sure that you know which direction is which. Not everybody can close their eyes and visualize a room and know that it's east. But you can have the feeling that the direction that your consciousness is facing, so to speak, is towards the source. And then that becomes the grounding point for the grid. You can also anchor this grid with symbolic objects. So I have a friend who knows this practice who works in the human resources section of a university. And he has set up his office so that in the corners there are symbols of the 4 angels, but they're not angels. They're, it looks like he likes to collect crystals and stones, you know, so it's in disguise as far as the other people in the office are concerned, but the stones become what I call a grounding agent for the angels. They help keep the connection through to physical reality. And then the grid is renewed through regular practice. I wouldn't say necessarily every single day, but on a regular basis, maybe once a week. It's good to check in. Over time, you may be able to perceive the devas somehow visually, and you can tell how well you're doing with truth, beauty, love, and power. Beauty is a hard one for a lot of people. Many of us feel like we have some kind of purpose in the world that we're trying to fulfill, but we don't do it, or we don't show it because we're afraid of what other people will think. That's an example of the light of the source that wants to come through us and could be beautiful, and we're not letting it. But if we use the mantra of the the beauty deva, love that isn't afraid to show itself, then we have the strength and support of the deva world to take that risk. And you know, if we love the devas, they'll love us back even if no person loves us that much. So we can do this in the home. A meditation room, a bedroom, can be extended to the house, the apartment, or any building, and any surrounding property. But you need to be careful of 2 things. Don't go beyond what you own or are responsible for. In other words, don't decide that you're going to impose the angels of the 4 corners on your neighbor who is somehow doing things you don't like. And the important thing is, wherever you put it, the intention should be support for the growth and development of all beings in that area, and not coercion or forcing people to do or be something else. So if you have a teenager who isn't cleaning his or her bedroom, putting the angels of the 4 corners in there probably won't help. And it might damage your relationship with the devas because of the coercive intention. For business, the same rules apply, but think about the different kinds of space. If you have a desk or a cubicle, it needs to be limited to just that space. If you have a private office, as my friend did, you can do it within that space. If you are the owner or the manager of a store or place of business, you could do it for the whole space. And what often happens in that case is everybody is lifted up a bit and supported. And you find that the people who aren't in alignment with it naturally leave, and the ones who are more in alignment with it naturally come in. But you have to be careful where you do this. In a similar practice, not identical, I had a pair of sisters who tried it. One of them did it in a meeting of a group that was trying to preserve some beautiful land in their town. And so she set up the room in a way that would encourage this. And the meeting was really only informational. But by the end of the meeting, they had $50,000 of pledges from people. And the leader of the meeting, who came from a group called the Nature Conservancy, said, "This never happens. Never the first time. There must have been a special energy in this room." Now, the sister decided she was going to take the same energy into her place of business. And she set it up and then was fired the next day. Because the energy there was too toxic, and by trying to bring something in to change it, she was pushed out. So, probably in a place of business, a meeting room, if it's not in constant use, is the best place. So if there's a place that you eat lunch, or a place that you go to meditate or have a little quiet time that's not in constant use, if you set it up in there, it will support everybody in feeling like they're having a break from the intensity of the living space. And again, the same rules apply. Don't do this in shared spaces or common areas that are in constant use, because there are people who may not be aligned with this and would be forcing it on them. And again, support, not coercion. So do it in your place of business to get your boss to be nicer to you, probably won't work. So for a spiritual center, it can also be used. These are all places where the angels of the four corners could be brought, and they would interlock with each other. None of them would interfere. A meditation room, classrooms, a lecture hall such as this one, the building itself, the property itself. And again, the same rules apply. Only do this, well, these are a little different. Only do this if you're the acknowledged leader of the place, or by permission of the leader or leaders, or at the request of the angels themselves, which assumes that you know how to receive that kind of guidance. I'm much more confident about doing this practice in this space because the angels are already here, so I'm really only introducing you to them instead of bringing them in. And again, support, not coercion is the purpose. So if you're doing this for personal growth, there are some things that you can learn as the practice evolves. Now, in all the practices that I teach, they're open-ended. The idea is that you have a basic structure, and then you set up the structure and just notice over time how it develops and changes. And things will show up, and you'll learn from that process. So, in a sense, there's no wrong way to do it, as long as you remember where the directions are and the angels are located. And there's a specific reason why that is important that you'll see when I show you the map. So this can be used for centering yourself, for creating a field of protection around a special space, for perceiving areas of work on oneself. So if you are unable to imagine yourself in the center of the space, this will happen. You'll try to imagine yourself in the center and you can't get there, you feel pushed out. There's an imbalance with one of the angels that you need to learn about. I'll talk in a moment about how those imbalances show up. you can have a feeling of being supported. My experience is that an energy that I call the Holy of Holies comes down into the exact center. And if I am able to go there, any inner spiritual work that I do, any meditation, has more support because the angels are there helping. It's possible to receive guidance as you have connected yourself to the devas, and they can give you teachings about truth and love, beauty, and power, and your relationship with these things, or your suffering because of these things. And if you're doing it in a larger space, it can support your family and your community. And especially, it helps you learn how to communicate and collaborate with devas, which can include their giving you tasks or missions. Not necessarily, of course, to save the world, to serve the world, yes. And I do sometimes get instructions about something that needs to be done from the devas. Usually it's when I'm walking around in the landscape and there's a neglected deva. For example, at Kratona, the deva that protects the entrance of Kratona was in a eucalyptus grove, a grove of old trees next to an abandoned house where a woman who lived to be nearly 100 years old had died, but no one had been living in that house for 20 years. And the deva had lost its connection to the earth. And I don't know when that connection was lost, but there was a wildfire at the entrance of Kratona just before I arrived there, and the deva said, "Help me reconnect to the earth." So as you start to work with the angels in this Four Corners practice, it might be that other devas will start to show up as you're wandering around your community. Now, unfortunately, I can't teach this today. I can only introduce it as some things to explore, some ideas, the advanced techniques that I've developed with my students. So one of the things that you can do is perceive the angel in the corner instead of just feel it. The mystics will tend to experience it as a flow of energy without a personality or an image. It could be the image of a being. The occultists tend to see it that way. Or it may come as a communication in feelings and words. The more mediumistic individuals will have that experience. Then there are two things that you check for. The first one is what I call check for grounding. You want to see that the angel is not just up in the corner. You want to see that it extends all the way down to the ground. What that means is that the angel can work through you or can work through the space that you're in. And then you check for the stature of the angel. If it's connected to the ground but it only goes halfway up, then you're not really allowing it to come through you, or there's a force in the room, a presence or a challenge in the community that's creating a problem. That involves you're allowing the angel to work through you. When I came into this room, all the angels were in the corners, but I used the mantras and easily they came down to ground themselves. So continuing with advanced techniques, you check for your own connection with the deva, and this is done by how you perceive it, if you perceive it as an image. This goes from lack of connection to best connection. So what often happens if you're perceiving the space internally is you look in the corner and there's no corner. There's just a landscape. The walls are missing. And that indicates that somehow you're completely out of relationship with that deva. There can be a corner but nothing in it. So that's a little better, but there still is some kind of work to be done. I would say with the corner that there's the possibility of connection, but it hasn't been established. There can be a stone statue there, which means that the deva is present, but somehow the communication or connection isn't flowing smoothly. A wooden statue is a better one because it's a once living substance. And then it can become a living presence or a being that moves, works more directly with you. And finally, it often, even for people who only use imagery, it becomes a fountain of energy to let you know that everything is perfectly in flow. And if you notice any of these effects, using the mantras, just focusing on the corner and using the appropriate mantra, repeating it inwardly, will tend to adjust the relationship. The problem with the stature, or the problem with the grounding, or the problem with the connection will change. Okay, so some questions about this. Here's The Guardian of the Heights by Leland. And actually, some of your questions might have to do with how does this look? How does this grid look? I have diagrams about that. I just wanted to make sure I paused so that people, had a chance to digest this more theoretical information. Here's one.
Yes, when you started naming the four angels, you started with truth, no power.
Power.
And you said
Yes.
east.
Yes.
But you didn't say the directions of the other three.
Yeah, those are in the maps, but it goes in this way: power, beauty, love, truth.
Yeah, east.
Yeah. Usually I go in this direction, starting from this corner.
Only for the starting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, let's go on. Okay, so here's the diagram. The east is the source, and luckily it happens to be that the diagram is appropriately associated with the space. So really, as I talk about the corners, you'll know which corner I mean. I call the east the source. That's the function of our connection or relationship with that direction, this grid. And the west is the self, capital S. So our whole self, as opposed to our little ego self. And if you think about this, this is the path of evolution. We have the self on one side, our beginning point, and we're evolving toward oneness with the source. The north is what I call the force of identity. It's what makes us individual. And in the Theosophical teaching, this is called the process of involution, which grants us our identity as we move away from source. And then to the south is what I call the force of union, and that's the path of evolution back, where we're constantly becoming one with ever larger collectives of consciousness. So now, the corners are the intersections of these different ideas. So the power corner, this one, power is identity plus source. Now I should tell you that the grid of where the angels were came to me before I knew how it was set up. I learned this from the devas after and didn't look for it first. So, and how does our idea of power change if we think about it in terms of our true identity expressing the energy of the source through it? So beauty is the experience of the source in connection with this force of identity. So again, think about how our idea of beauty changes when we think about the source as being the source of beauty, and our union with the source is our feeling of what beauty is whenever we perceive it outside of ourselves. Love is union plus self. So clearly, if you're talking or thinking about any kind of relationship, the experience of union that allows us to become something more than the individual self is what's involved. And then with truth, we have the combination of self plus identity. So many of you have probably heard the term life purpose. That is essentially the truth of our being, and you can understand it by this idea of self plus identity. So that's the basis of the grid, and the mantras are all designed to attune us to each of these ideas of power, beauty, love, and truth. And then, as the we progress, we create an arc that goes from power to love, and then from truth to beauty. I usually do it in those directions, and I don't necessarily know that it's a must, that you must do it that way. But I think we have probably more troubles with power and truth than we do with beauty and love. And when we add beauty to truth and love to power, they're modified. So I always start and draw the arc in my imagination from power to love and from truth to beauty. And then at the crossing point, we have our Holy of Holies in the room that would coincide with this exactly central light. And I just want to talk for a moment about what happens to bring in the subtle alignment deva. There's an invocation that we'll do. I request, or we request, the presence of the subtle alignment deva, or you could say the Great Mother. Please come, there is need, and I am willing to learn. Tell me how it does in the Dutch. Only okay? Yeah, okay. Again. Let me explain how this is structured. First of all, whenever we're working with devas, we request their presence. They don't have to show up. We don't expect it. We don't demand it. Second, we invite them to come. That's what please come means. And we let them know that we understand or feel that there's a real need for their presence. So we don't do this as out of curiosity. And then finally, we say that we're willing to learn, because a high deva like this one isn't interested in anything else. They'll support us in our growth. That's it. So if we say, I'm willing to learn, and place ourselves in receptivity, then we'll learn something. Think how different this is from the willfulness of those spiritual practices involved in mantras where you're demanding a car, for example. Okay, I'll come back to this and I'll put it up on the screen again later. And if it's not quite correct, modify it in your own mind the way that it goes. Okay, that's what brings in the subtle alignment deva. When we have created these arcs and when we use this invocation. And remember, the invocation is really just aligning us with this great mother presence that's already everywhere in the universe. It's not a demand that it come from somewhere far away. Now, for those of you who are theosophists, there's an additional way that you can use this diagram, connecting it directly to important people. So for example, I think everyone would agree that the Master Morya, or Master M, is an expression of right use of power. And in a similar way, Master KH, or Kukumi, is an expression of love. And they're often called that in the literature, in terms of the so-called rays that they express. The ray of power and the ray of love wisdom. So those are the superhumans, the masters. In the truth corner, Blavatsky and Besant, both of whom were so strongly focused on teachings and truth. And then in this corner, names that are perhaps a little less known, although Rukmini is very famous here at Narada. Rukmini was the director for many, many years, and she was also an expert Indian dancer in the traditional style, and was very involved in work with the arts wherever she lived and taught. And CJ stands for C. Jinnarajadasa, a Ceylonese or Sinhalesian man who was a student of Leadbeater, who was also an international president of the Theosophical Society, and is one of the few writers on the Theosophical Society rolls who constantly talked about art. And then, because of Leadbeater having the role of a ceremonialist and sort of priest slash magician, I include him here as helping to hold the grid together. And then what happens when you place yourself in rapport with these expressions of the angels, the guardian deva of the Theosophical Society shows up. And this is one of the ways that you can keep the integrity of the spiritual community. This isn't necessary, though. It's something that I do when I'm in a theosophical space, meditating, because I think it strengthens the connections with the tradition and the teaching and the reservoir of help that's associated with these people. So these I've already mentioned. I'll just highlight them again. I think it's best always to do this practice in the order: power, beauty, love, and truth. And if you're drawing the arcs, from power to love and from truth to beauty. So questions? Here's a form-building deva, again by Melanie Mills. Looking a little bit like a somewhat forceful great mother. So, of course, the next stage is the practice itself. So the question is, are we ready to dive in? So let me explain what we'll do with this practice. I'll simply ask you to direct your attention to each of the corners in turn. And I'll remind you of the power that's represented there with the deva. And I'll put up the screen that has the mantras on it. And just take a moment, eyes open and closed, to repeat these mantras in your own mind. And just notice anything that you experience or sense as your focus of attention is on each of the angels in turn. Then I'll talk about imagining the arcs in the way that I spoke about. And then we'll do the invocation to request the presence of the subtle alignment deva. And at that point, I will have a piece of music played, which is a piece of kirtan music. In some yoga traditions, there's a devotional call and response form of singing that's done. And there's a wonderful American group called Shantala that combines ancient Indian instruments with guitars and tabla and some singing in order to bring you a Sanskrit chant that's dedicated to the Great Mother. And what I find is that this piece of music, for about 8 minutes, will hold us in the space that has been created by our use of this grid. And after the music is over, just be as long as you wish in the special space that's created. And the one thing that I'll notice is when people start to open their eyes, I may say something. And what I'll do is I'll ask you to sense the energy of the room, just to notice how it's changed. In fact, you might want to take a moment just to sense the energy of the room now. What it feels like to me is people are open, interested, a little expectant, mostly not really nervous about it. And if you feel those things yourself, there'll be quite a startling change in the energy when we're finished with the practice. So, as I mentioned, the invocation will also be present on a slide. I'll make that change when the time comes. Okay. So, have your eyes closed for a moment. And turn your attention inward. And I see many of you are seated in a way that means that you're not crossing your legs or your arms. That's a good form of openness. And take a couple of deep breaths. It doesn't have to be in unison with others. The sort of thing you would do to begin any meditation practice. And I'm going to, as I go from one angel to the next, I'll repeat the English version of the mantra twice. And you're welcome to open your eyes and remind yourself if you need to of the mantras as they're expressed in Dutch. Use your own translation. So let's turn our attention now to this corner, which represents the power deva, the intersection of the forces of identity and the source. And as you turn your attention toward that corner and the power deva, remind yourself inwardly of the mantra of that deva. Power that does its duty without control. Power that does its duty without control. And if you don't want to open your eyes as we move to the next deva, you'll just shift your focus to the right, or clockwise, and that corner represents the beauty deva. And of course it's okay to look. I'll just point up there for a moment if you want to check and make sure. And as you focus your attention on the beauty deva, remember that this is the intersection of source and union. And the mantra is beauty that isn't afraid to show itself. Beauty that isn't afraid to show itself. And then continuing in the same direction, clockwise, bring your attention to the next corner, the one that represents love. And remember that love is the intersection of union and self. And the mantra is love that stands firmly and doesn't turn away. Love that stands firmly and doesn't turn away. Bring your awareness to the last of the four corners, the corner of the truth, deva. And remember that this is the intersection of self and identity. And the mantra is truth that guides without judgment. guides without judgment. And then continuing once again in the same direction, come back to the power deva. And imagine that there's an arc going up and over from that deva to the one directly diagonally opposite, the love deva. And then bring your attention to the truth deva in the corner that I'm pointing to if you want to be reminded. And draw an arc in your mind from that deva up across diagonally to the beauty deva. And now notice the point where those devas are, or those lines are intersecting directly above the center of the room. And if you want to remind yourself of where that center is, I pointed out the light. Go ahead and look towards it. Or just direct your thoughts in that way. And I'll say the invocation to the subtle alignment deva twice as I did before. And if you need to remind yourself, it's on the screen. I request the presence of the subtle alignment deva. Please come. There is need, and I'm willing to learn. I request the presence of the subtle alignment deva. Please come. There is need, and I'm willing to learn. It looks like I might need some help with the volume for the music. feeling of unity consciousness that's present with us in the room. It might break down because of the warmth of the room as we start to feel our bodies again, so I wanted to make sure I give you a chance to notice it. Any of you who are interested in the source of that music, it's from a wonderful album from 2006 called The Love Window. Every piece of music on this album is wonderful in a different way. Many of them are quite ecstatic in addition to being peaceful. So I highly recommend it. So our schedule says that we'll be finished at 4:30, and I think it would be a good time for wrap-up questions, for comments if anybody has them about the program, or for any sharing of a personal experience with this practice if you're interested in and would like to contribute that to our understanding. Instructions you can remember, or how many of them you took pictures of if you had your phones, so that you can try to practice on your own. I think I may make a PDF of this set of slides that will be available through the center here that people can perhaps email someone to send it to by request so that you can have an opportunity to work with it. If any of you feel brave enough to teach it, I would like some acknowledgement, or you might even want to ask me some questions about it. I do intend to put it in a future book. We always, as authors, hope that when we're teaching like this, that someone doesn't trademark it before we have a chance to assert the fact that we were somehow involved in its production. And for me, it's not so much an ego thing. I want it to spread because I think it's useful. But there may be ways in which it's not fully understood by someone who's only experienced it once, and I'd like to make sure that at some point it comes out into the world in a way that is, in my understanding, complete. That's the first challenge. The second one is, where do we find or create community or unity consciousness, such as we experienced here? And I'd like to suggest that this International Theosophical Center in Arden, because devas are very present on the property, and because the people who live here and work here are very aware of and sensitive to their presence, and because I've identified a few of these places, it's a place to come to for support and renewal when you need to have the experience of uplift and spiritual joy and peace that come with connections to the devas. And I don't know if Besant Hall is open sometimes when there's no class here as a meditation hall, but I imagine that if it were open sometimes, people might have an opportunity to come and just remind themselves of the orientation within the space. The angels are already here, and so if you have some doubts about whether you're able to work with them on your own or in your own space, it may be that you can work something out with coming here to have an experience of renewed connection to them. They won't go away, as Art was saying. And there are many things to explore. There's an avenue of cypress trees. There's another avenue of beech trees. Both of them have strong deva presence. I've already spoken about the Buddha, and I know several people went there. The little pond that's in the center of the English garden has a very strong deva presence in it that goes out to the perimeter of the path. You can sit in that deva aura. There are a few special trees. There's an area called the Round Table Camp that has a beautiful copper beech tree. It has a new deva that's come in to support work that's being done in a building called the Atelier, where the yoga classes are taught. That area is probably sometimes closed, so you would maybe want to talk to the staff to make sure that there's not a group using it that you would interfere with. There is the Garden of Remembrance that's next to the Liberal Catholic Church. I understand that it will soon be undergoing a kind of renewal process, but right now, Annie Besant's ashes are supposedly under one of the trees, and there's a monument there. And the two trees actually that are directly shading that monument have an enormously powerful deva in them, and so sitting in the garden and being in that ambience can also be useful. And remember gratitude. As long as we're in gratitude for any beauty in the world, any nature that we experience, that keeps us connected to devas. And of course, there may be people who experience them. And if you're in a spiritual group and you feel safe enough to talk about your own experience, if you've had them, you may find that there are other people in the group who've also had experiences. I've had individual conversations over the day with 8 or 10 people who came up to tell me about a deva-related experience. So they're not all of that rare. Some of them are, in fact, quite simple and down to earth, having to do with a tree that is cut down and grows. And why shouldn't that be as important in our spiritual life as a magnificent, grandiose ceremony that's deeply impressive? As we start to realize that, in a sense, the devas are present behind everything that we do, we can be grateful for any little help we get, which could include the highways clear of traffic when we need to get someplace. Why not? Somehow we align with the forces that allow that to be our experience. What I find develops over time is anxiety is reduced, because you start to feel that the universe is a loving place, a caring, supportive place, that the support is always there, and no matter what your experience of it may be with other people, which support and love can come and go because of the stresses and challenges of personal and family and communal life, the devas are an expression of the love and care of the creator, the source, you can always tune into that. Probably your best connection is this piece of music, because the music itself carries that vibration, and even if you're not in a space where you're working with the angels of the four corners, you can be reminded of your connection to the devas, because we've had that experience here today. And as I mentioned, the whole album itself is really wonderful. This group still exists. They have other recordings. I've tried a few of them, and they almost always have at least one really wonderful piece. But this one, if you download it, I'm not sure if it's still available as CD. I recommend downloading all of it. So, I hope that helps.
Sorry, I think. Is it working?
Sorry, my question was not really clear. What I tried to bring forward is that we've experienced that there can be times of enormous energy when we are working together like that, and when we stop with that, the energy becomes dormant. So, in terms of the interconnection with the devas, what is happening there? What's happening now?
I see. Well, it's a related question, because always the deva world and the human world have the potential to be in relation with each other. And if that relation is somehow broken down, it's usually not because of the devas. It's because of human intention or distraction or forgetfulness and so on. So really, the way that I answered the question was, how do we keep ourselves open and responsive? There are teachings that talk about different times of the year when the devas are more present or more. Springtime is an hour, because all of the energies that are quiet during the winter start to stir in the life of the trees and so on. But I don't think of them that way. I think of them as always present and always equally powerful. Their expression on the physical plane can vary according to the seasons. Mostly it's our own attention that varies, and so we need to nurture our own relationships with them to keep that energy flowing. In terms of, let me just put that under the word renewal. There's a rhythm or flow of renewal in nature. There's a rhythm and flow of our ability to renew our own relationship with the devas. Life can take us away, and life can bring us back. And some of the things that we deeply love are cars, if we happen to be of that type, or a sentimental object, or a devotional object, or an altar that we have, some sacred space that we love. These are all reminders, and it's really a lifelong project to be constantly aware of and living and working with devas. I think part of the challenge with my answering that question is the more involved I become with devas, the more I realize that their consciousness is without time and space as ours is. It has a feeling of the infinite and non-local. And so to think about my relationship with the devas internally, I think of sacred space, which is the space that I've created in myself to have that experience. And it's a place outside of it has a different history or rhythm. So my feeling is there's timelessness and spacelessness in me as I'm connected to the devas, and the flow that you're talking about doesn't disturb me in the same way. At the same time, the devas may say now or not now when something needs to be done. And if we listen, we get more support for understanding why that might be the case. I think they test us sometimes to see whether we really listen. But there are many, many forces in play creating any event that the devas have much more awareness of than we do. We can't use our will. So I'm probably rambling a little bit because it's the end of a long day and it's warm in here. So I hope I not only responded somewhat to your question, but also brought some closure to the things that we've been talking about and thinking about today. So, yes, there's a question.
Well, I have...
Wait till the microphone comes.
Yeah, well, I don't want to interfere.
Later we can talk about what you really think.
I just wanted to ask you, can you show us the former picture of the world mother?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
I just wanted to refer to what you just said. You made this deva seem like these outwardly forces, but could you also say that it is our own energy you're feeling, or is it a stretch too far maybe?
Well, that's another subject, a longer subject. But I can say briefly that these two side-by-side evolutions, human and deva, the highest levels merge. And so deva consciousness and human consciousness becomes one. And you could think about them as being, somebody suggested this at Pumpkin Hollow, the idea of the divine twin, not so much as a twin flame or a personal partner, but as the other half of our consciousness, and that both the human and the deva consciousness are reflections of two sides of the divine. And that when they merge, that's towards the end of our spiritual path, when we become one with our source. So the problem with answering your question is it has to be related to the stage of development that we're talking about. I would say that in certain stages of development where the self or the ego is very strong, we use our will to create things, and the devas are not very responsive to that. But we learn about the strengths and limitations of working in that way. And then at some point we realize that we need to let go of that will and flow. And as we flow, we learn how the forces are moving, and we feel the devas behind the forces, and then there can be some communication or interaction. In all events that we experience as humans, there's some contribution that we make, and there's some contribution that the devas make. And learning how to bring them together, I think, is an advanced but essential evolutionary step. So I hope that helps a little bit. Yes, and here?
I have a question which is a little bit outside some things, but I think it will be also very helpful for us if we are going into our practice in daily life. You told us about when there was business and where there is, you have a room or you have a house or a building. That I didn't know why it stayed in my mind, but after we did the corners, there came a question for the center. I think perhaps it's not, but I feel it like that. We are building now on the grounds a new home, a new house. It's called, has already a name. There has already also been ceremonies. It's still not finished. It's in the building, in the engineering building phase. And there also was a ceremony with putting crystals in it. But in this regard, what can the people of the center and in combination with the angels, so you also have to ask things. Can it be helpful in this building time period that some of us, of just people who think about it, that there is something with the corners, because the building is coming up, but it's new. It was flat down and now there is coming a new energy. And that has all a new name. It was an old name and the name has changed. Have you in your clairvoyance or mystic feeling that it would be helpful if we sometimes focus on that? Or we have to wait till it's finished, because it's a little bit, I just want to bring it out, but it can also happen in your own, if you are going to move or if you build a new business.
I think that it's usually better to bring those angels of the four corners in after a space is completed. Really, power, truth, love, and beauty represent intersections of deva consciousness and human consciousness. specifically teaching us to live in harmony with each other and in the universe, and in harmony with the devas also. And so once the space is ready to be occupied, to bring those forces into the corners helps to keep a higher energy present there. But they're not needed for building the space. I understand that the gemstones that were used were blessed, and they would represent the focal point for another kind of deva to come in and embrace the whole. But these angels are really about the work that's done inside of the space. And I think it's better when the space is complete before they come in. The microphone here. Yes.
Speaking of crystals and stones, you mentioned in an earlier story that someone in a workspace or an office space had used specific crystals to represent the different angels. Are these set in stone, or is it what the person gives to them as a meaning?
It's what the person gives to them.
So it could be any crystal that you wanted to use.
Yeah, I think that the idea is each one is associated with a particular angel or a corner by the feeling of what is right. However, in 30 years, who knows how many books will be published with the Angels of the Four Corners crystals, the only official version, in 10 different books, each one different.
And I have a follow-up question pertaining to something you said, but it might not be appropriate at this time at the end. You referenced a story about a dark magician that you might share with us.
That's a lovely thing to talk about in front of the Great Mother.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a bit of unfinished business, but I think it's probably the aside.
Right. Friends, I think okay, the very last question. Yeah,
I like the ceremony, and by doing the mantras, I was a bit hindered by the negative words. The negative words, like love that does not fade away or something like that. It's not possible to replace it by a positive expression, like it endures forever, something like that.
So I think there are probably many different ways to express each of the mantras. That particular one was phrased in that way as a counterbalance for the tendency in people who are very selfless and in service to allow themselves to be used by other people who take power and control over them, and to empower them to stand strongly against that kind of behavior of mistreatment. Because I think that when love functions properly, we don't have these problems. But in order to leave an abusive relationship, for example, it's necessary to stand very firmly against the abuse and to have a great deal of inner support and strength. In a relationship where we're working from selfless service, we're already aligned with that love deva. So I think also in some ways, because the mantras were given to me in connection with the Theosophical Society, they are messages about particular challenges that need to be considered within the organization itself. For example, when I go to a Theosophical Center and I look at the angels, the truth angel is always enormous, and the beauty angel is often neglected. And sometimes the love deva is there and sometimes it isn't. But the power deva and the truth deva almost always are present. So I think it should be understood that the mantras came through the way the devas were in the space that I learned in. And there may be personal modifications that you could make that would also align you directly with them. As I said, these are open-ended practices, and often when I'm working with my students, they come up with innovations I never would have thought of that are a contribution to common knowledge. And I think this kind of exploration should be done in this way instead of dogmas being taught. So I would be interested if you experiment with the more positive statement, how it was framed, and I hope you would communicate that with me.
Okay, I will do so.
Yes, thank you. Okay, this is a good point to end.
Okay, good. I think I need to thank you very, very much on behalf of all of us for the very exciting day and a very deep day that you have shared with us today. It's the beginning of a journey. As I said this morning, we are going further into this subject. At the same time, I think I'm already looking forward to the seminar that you're going to conduct here in 2 years' time. But there's more time to go into specific details. So in that respect, there's a way forward and to look forward to. There was one thing that just you reminded me on with respect to the last question. Sometimes you have to modify a bit. Actually, here in the center, we modified the seal of the Theosophical Society a bit because we have included roses under the seal of the Theosophical Society, which represent beauty. And that was one of the elements that Rukmini always stressed upon, that this was the stage for dance performances in the past, which was one of Rukmini's things. And beauty, in how we experience it reveals truth. And so in that respect, the two corners are more or less connected, I would say.
I didn't see any problems with the data. I usually feel like I have to fix problems.
Good. I have a very short, small token of our appreciation with us. It's a little jar with something sweet in it, but afterwards there's something other, or something else you can do with it. It's a typical Dutch thing, so something to remind of these wonderful things. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much for your wonderful attention and participation, and I look forward to seeing some of you, if not all of you, again in 2 years, or